When I reminded him of that in 2016, I said, you were a real dick, but then the next day you were nice. Why is that? He said, well, of course I was nice the second day because you were with very important people.
What attracted you to Donald Trump? And I'm going to tell people how you and I first met, which I think is an interesting part of the story, but what attracted you to Donald Trump?
Well, as I say in the envoy, I didn't know Trump other than a sort of fateful meeting with him in 1988 at the Republican convention in New Orleans when George H.W. Bush gave his famous Peggy Noonan penned 1,000 Points of Light speech. And as I say, I ran into him in the elevator lobby. He was a total dick. I was asking him about an issue he had confronted in his business that we were facing as well, that was very well publicized. I wasn't bothering him. No one was around. And he was very dismissive of me because he didn't know who I was. He'd never heard of me. I was young, et cetera, et cetera. The next day, I'm sitting in the bar with two other people whom he knew quite well. And he came over and he said, you know, tell me more about the hotel thing. And he couldn't have been nicer. And when I reminded him of that in 2016, I said, you were a real dick, but then the next day you were nice. Why is that? He said, well, of course I was nice the second day because you were with very important people.
Right. Well, I mean, the transparency is weirdly refreshing. It's almost like so transparent that you almost have to like, right. No, because he's the dick of dicks, and so that's why it's so interesting, and that that's why I wanted to bring it up. But we met, and I'm going to tell you where we met. See if you test your memory. I had the good fortune of sitting next to you at what was my first fundraiser, and so what I did was I traveled with Mr. Trump to New Mexico. And then we boarded his plane to L.A. and we went to, was it Tom's house? I think it was Tom Barrack's house. We went to Tom Barrack's house. There was a tent outside. We had Wolfgang Puck cooking the meal. And it was a fundraiser. It was our first real fundraiser that I had organized with Steven Mnuchin, who went on to become the Secretary of Treasury. And you and I sat next to each other, built a nice rapport with each other. And then I saw your name pop up in the transition. So I was on the executive transition team, and you had your hand raised, I believe. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more or less in the record, to be an ambassador. And so we were looking for different spots for you. And then, which I think is arguably one of the most prestigious ambassadorships in the world, because people thought so well of you, you ended up as the ambassador to the EU. But you had to go through a very tough vetting process because of the partisanship going on in Washington. So tell us a little bit about that, and tell us how you ended up in the job.
Well, I almost wound up, with no job. I mean, while I greatly appreciated your advocacy and that of Steven Mnuchin's, I committed, I should say, the unpardonable sin of dropping out of the campaign toward the end. And the reason I dropped out of the campaign, which I go through in the envoy, was that one of my key employees, who is Muslim, said he was very unhappy with President Trump's characterization during the 𝗕cije𝗵𝗵 incident. And I said, listen, say no more. If you're uncomfortable.
Okay, so let's go over that for our view. Not to interrupt you, but the 𝗕cije𝗵𝗵 incident, the family lost their son in the military.
Yeah, their family lost their son, and instead of being an empathetic person, President Trump was highly critical of the family and the father in particular. It really turned off a lot of the Muslim American community, as well as the greater American community. It was one of those milestones in the campaign, which, included the remarks coming down the escalator, the TMZ tape, and now this. And I was put in a very difficult position. So I said, listen, you're more important to me than a political campaign. I will step down. I had already raised some money for the campaign. I had done my part. So when Trump finally became the nominee and then became president of the United States, this employee came back to me and said, listen, we have to support the president of our party. This guy was also a Republican. And he said, I'll get over it. If you want to participate, go ahead. You won't have any issues with me. So at that point, the campaign was over. He had already won. And I decided the only way to re-engage in the campaign was to essentially attend the inauguration and reconnect with all the people that I, lost contact with in those last 3 months, which I did.